May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Last Sunday, as I signed the children's Bible, which St. Martha's gave to Bryn for her baptism, my heart filled. For I remembered that when I was a young girl, just a little older than Bryn, one of my prized possessions was a worn copy of Hurlburt's Book of Bible Stories. This text was about 2 inches thick, with long pages of fine print, and only a few black and white pictures. The strange language of the King James text, the only available translation in the 50s, did not faze me, however, because I was so entranced by the stories themselves. Of all the stories, the story of Samuel was one of my favorites. As I lay in my bed reading at bedtime each night, I imagined with awe the little boy Samuel who got to hear God call his name and to respond, "Here I am, Lord." I dreamed that I too might hear God calling me in the night. Although I knew that Samuel was a figure from ancient times, there must have been a part of my childhood heart that understood that Samuel is an archetype, a model for the ways in which God is always breaking into our lives. The theophany, or manifestation of God in our lives, is the central theme of Epiphany, our current liturgical season, which refers specifically to the bursting forth of the one true light. Samuel is but one example of the throng of witnesses throughout Scriptures that God is always doing new things, great things, in unexpected places through unlikely people. Samuel is an unlikely person because, like Samson and Isaac before him, he is born to a barren woman. His mother, Hannah, had become increasingly despondent because she was not able to have children. In those days, barren women were despised and isolated. Although her husband loved her, Hannah was even scorned by her husband's other wife, who had produced children. Hannah goes to the temple, and actually the shrine at Shiloh, and weeps as she prays, begging for a child, and vowing to dedicate this child to God if her request is granted. Eli, the priest of the temple, at first accuses her of being drunk. But when he has heard her story, he says, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." Hannah returns home. Her husband, Elkanah, knows her intimately, and in due time, the baby is born. He is given the name Samuel, which means he who is from God, or a name of God. Hannah praises God for raising up the poor and lifting up the needy in a song which foreshadows the Song of Mary generations later. Hannah remembers her promise and takes her beloved child to the temple as soon as he is weaned, to be brought up in the service of the Lord by Eli, who is old and blind and has not exactly been a good priest or a good father to his own children. This, then, is the setting for the encounter which occurs in today's lesson. It is a richly nuanced story of darkness and light, of blindness and sight and insight, of listening and the coming of understanding. The writer calls us to attention with an enigmatic phrase. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. In other words, take note. God is always doing new things, great things, in unexpected places through unlikely people. We know that it is night because the candle is still burning. We are told that Eli has lost his sight then. Samuel is not lying beside the old man, but in the temple or shrine by the Ark of the Covenant, which is a symbolic place to sleep if one desires a vision. As he lies there, he hears a voice calling his name. Samuel, Samuel. Samuel, your very name reminds us that you are intimate with God. In Samuel's name, we hear the message that we are each known intimately and loved by God. The word know in Hebrew scriptures refers to the intimate knowing of a marital relationship and is often used to express God's relationship to God's people. The psalmist today expresses this beautifully. Lord, you have searched me out and known me. For you yourself created my inmost parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. The prophet Jeremiah echoes this sentiment as well in what he hears from God. Before I knew you, I formed you in the womb, and before you were born, I consecrated you. The great truth of the story of creation in Genesis is that we humans are made in the image of God. That is our birthright. When God looks at us, God sees God's reflection in the mirror. God knows us in the most intimate way because we are of God's own self, black or white, African or Asian or American, straight or gay, young or old, unbaptized or baptized. The great truth of baptism is that God calls us by name, and calls us by name and keeps calling us by name. God never gives up in the search to bring all of humanity to God's self. God has even sent God's Son to pay the price of love in the search for us. In baptism, we acknowledge that price and are marked as Christ's own forever. Samuel is known to God, but he does not yet know God. The relationship is not yet mutual. He does not catch on right away as to who is calling him. He needs the wisdom of Eli, old and broken though he may be, to encourage and guide him. We, like Samuel, need the wisdom and guidance of others in our communities if we are to discern the voice and message of God in our lives. Like Samuel and like Nathaniel in today's gospel, we are dependent on others to say, "Come and see," as they bring us to Christ. Throughout my life, I have been blessed with mentors who have showered me with love, with God's unconditional love, including the monk in a children's mission who taught me to sing, "I sing a song of the saints of God and believe it." And more importantly, as well as my favorite uncle, who always found ways to affirm me when I was a teenager and needed it, my husband Neil, and countless others. Those who love and guide us, and we who guide others, whether consciously or unconsciously, are not perfect and may even be quite broken. But the scriptures remind us that God is more than able to use imperfect vessels to do new and great things in unexpected places. Eli has already been warned once that his children will die prematurely because of their misdoings, but he is nevertheless God's agent for Samuel. Knowing that God works through people, however imperfect they may be, assures us that God will work through us, whatever our weaknesses. "Here I am, Lord. Speak, for your servant is listening." Guided by Eli, Samuel finally understands on the fourth try that it is God who is calling him, and responds with understanding. Note that God has not given up. Samuel wasn't running away in this case. He was trying to figure out what was going on. But even if we do run away, God will find us. The psalmist this morning reminds us that whether we go to heaven or to the sea or to the grave or fly away on the wings of the morning, God will be there waiting. But what does it mean to hear God? A favorite spiritual writer of mine responds very profoundly. Each of us has an inner voice calling us to be who we are. To embrace the unique word God speaks in creating us is to encounter God. To say, "Here I am, Lord," is to have the audacity to believe in and the courage to exercise the particular gifts that identify one's deepest self. To say, "Here I am, Lord," is to have the audacity to believe in and the courage to exercise the particular gifts that identify one's deepest self. In a similar way, Abraham Heschel, a renowned Jewish theologian, invites us to experience ourselves as the divine secret. When we say, "Here I am, Lord," we are acknowledging that the image of God is within us, that we are made in that image, that the light and goodness of God, which cannot be overcome by darkness and evil, is within us from the moment of our creation. The image of God is affirmed in our baptism as we are united with the Christ who fully demonstrates the divine image, and we are empowered by the Spirit. Nelson Mandela, through whom God performed a very revolutionary act in a very unlikely place, expressed this idea beautifully in his inaugural address as President of South Africa in 1994. "We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fears, our presence automatically liberates others. Samuel, Samuel. Ponder your deepest yearnings as they reflect God's image within you. What are the particular gifts that identify your deepest self? Do you have the courage to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening"? The story of Samuel does not simply invite us to generalize from that young boy to our own identity, however. More importantly, it is the story of God about to act in the world with Samuel as God's instrument. Remember, God is always doing new things, great things in unexpected places through unlikely people. Once God has Samuel's attention, God speaks these startling words. "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears it tingle." Samuel was not directed to stay in the temple and worship, but to go out immediately and engage in some very tough actions. This young boy was to begin by going to his beloved mentor with a repeat warning of the judgment that was going to fall on Eli's family for their sins. Eventually, Samuel has to reprimand Saul and tell him that God has rejected him as king. Later, he must resist David's family, who want a different son to be chosen as king. Thus, the story of Samuel reminds us that we must move from our identity in God to discipleship. We are made of God to do God's work. Each of us, by virtue of our baptism, is called to exercise a vocation that uncovers and proclaims the light and love of God, and which participates in God's work of justice and peace, whether we are mothers or fathers or teachers or truck drivers or salespersons. Today's gospel reminds us that Jesus wants each of us to say, "Come and see." We are a missionary people, and we are all called to be missionaries, persons who are sent out, some to preach, some to teach, some to heal, some to show hospitality, all to love. There is reward in doing God's work, but there is also risk and cost. When we witness to the presence of God's love by marching in a Martin Luther King Day or a Gay Pride Day, when we celebrate the lifelong union of gay couples, when we work in God's pantries, or host a dialogue with a Kenyan bishop, we invite the possibility of scorn or rejection. For Christ, the ultimate cost of being true to his identity was the cross. St. Martha's was founded with the vision of doing God's work of justice and peace in the world. St. Martha's right now is at a great time of promise and challenge. We have the excitement of moving into a new physical space and anticipating new leadership. But we must not forget our mission and purpose. Remember, God is always doing new things, great things in unexpected places through unlikely people. Do we have the courage to say, "Here I am, Lord. I will go, Lord, if you send me. I will hold your people in my hand"?